class. Jan was telling me last week that Kathleen in Chicago was looking on, so we'll say hello to Kathleen. So hope she's doing well. And then I know Barbara at times in Dallas looks on, so we may be multi-state. Who knows? So anyway, so we're glad that they do look in on us every once in a while. So we appreciate that. So with that, I'm trying to think, are there any announcements today? Anything I should mention?
Well, all of the Wednesday night activities will resume.
Stan says all the Wednesday night activities will resume this week. So they were off last week for fall break. So people are hopefully getting back or have gotten back by now. So anything else I need to? Betty Allison has gone home this past week, so there's a meal train out there to sign up for her, an email to do that. So that is praise. So.
My sister-in-law, Mary Fox, we've all been praying for her for 10 years, but she's gone back to the hospital.
Okay, Nona says her sister-in-law, Mary Fox, has gone back to the hospital, so she's been on the prayer list for some time, but maybe needs even more prayer right now. So, okay, good. Anything else this morning?
Melinda's got bronchitis.
Oh, no.
This week, so she.
Oh, no. Okay. Melinda has bronchitis, so she's out this morning. David's still doing okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's slow, but he's coming along.
Okay.
He can't do too much till he has to rest.
Okay, so keep David, Melinda's husband, in your prayers as well. Okay. Is that it? All right. Well, let's open with prayer this morning, if you would, and we'll get started for today. And Jeff, would you open us in prayer this morning, please?
Heavenly Father, we thank you that we have the opportunity to come before you with our concerns, needs, petitions for those that are needing assistance, needing medical help, need healing. We give thanks for those who have had healing and are going through that process. We just thank you, Lord, for your presence around us, and we give you glory for having been the creator, the sustainer, and the savior. Lord, we just pray that as we look into your word today, that we will have our minds opened, our hearts will be freed, that we will submit to you. We thank you, Lord, for your presence. For it's in Christ's name we pray.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. All right. Our lesson today is entitled Storms of Life. Storms of Life. We'll be looking at Genesis chapter 7, verses 6 through 24. There is a handout. I need to get you that. My number one helper's not here, James, please. He's on vacation. The number one helper's on vacation. Well, good for him. So Easton is out this morning. So he's got to get back for school, though, doesn't he? Oh, homeschools. Oh, so this is a field trip, maybe. All right, well, good. So the initial question you see there on your outline, you don't need it really, is what's the worst weather storm you have been in? What's the worst weather storm you've been in? Jeff says tornado. It's been a couple that we've experienced here in the last 20 years or so, a little over 20 years, that were pretty devastating to this area. Were you referring to one of the others specifically, Jeff?
Well, the one I experienced closest was the one you were to, was downtown.
Yeah. 1998, I think it was, that the tornado hit downtown Nashville, then went on through Lebanon, and I don't know where it ended. So, but anyway, yeah, it was pretty devastating. During that storm, I remember I was sitting in my office. My office was enclosed as a triangle office, so it's enclosed on two sides by glass. So I could see outside relatively easily. And I thought, well, tornadoes, we had kind of a warning or alert or whatever it was, and I thought, well, tornadoes never hit a metropolitan area like this, I thought. So, I wasn't too concerned about it. But then I saw the trees started bending. That was outside, in 90-degree angle, I guess, outside my office. I said, this might be serious. So I got up from my desk and was walking. Our safe place was the stairwells, and it had supposedly emergency doors on it. So I was walking to the stairwell, and about the time I got out of my office, I started hearing glass break and so forth in my office, and got to the stairwell, which supposedly had the emergency door. A lot of people were kind of in there at that point, but it blew the emergency door open even. So a lot of y'all experienced that, so that was a pretty severe storm. Any other storms you've experienced, weather storms you've experienced? Yeah, Mark.
Through hurricanes down in Florida and blizzards in Denver.
Hurricane in Florida and blizzard in Denver. Which hurricane was that?
Hurricane Earl.
Earl.
One that went through, I'm a weather guy, so it was my job to write them out and forecast to get the planes out of safety. So.
Mm-hmm. What year was Earl? Okay, somewhere between 1998 and 2002, Hurricane Earl. Yeah.
Blizzard of 82 in Denver, closed down Denver for 4 days, airport and everything.
Blizzard of 82 in Denver closed down the city for 4 days, which you would think would be pretty unusual for Denver. They should be used to snow, so. 26 inches of snow in a day and a half, Mark says. That's a lot of snow. So we get a half an inch and it closes us down. So. Anybody else? No?
I went through a whiteout coming back from Knoxville. We had never we've heard of whiteout, but we've never experienced one. But we were on the plateau coming up on Crossville, and all of a sudden, it was like somebody threw a sheet across the windshield. You could see nothing. And people that never been through a whiteout, we didn't know exactly what to do. Thank goodness it only lasted maybe a couple of minutes, and it cleared off. But that's pretty scary.
Alice said they went through a whiteout on the plateau, Cumberland Plateau, that lasted for a couple of minutes or so, but you couldn't see anything. It's like having a sheet over your car. So that was obviously a scary moment. So anybody else? Okay, well, let's take a minute and look at, you might recall there was a flood in Lebanon a couple of years or so ago. So let's take a minute and look at a severe weather event video. Oh, this is the Nashville tornado, excuse me. Is there any sound to this? No. All right. Well, thank you. We get the point on the first part of that anyway, the trees and everything that were blowing. So that was obviously a severe, major damage storm. I forgot there were some lives lost in that. I can't remember the number now, but a few lives lost in that tornado. But the damage in that tornado was obviously physical damage to things, but also, other than loss of life, there is emotional and mental damage that affect people that go through severe weather events, tornadoes and hurricanes and floods and other things. So there are other storms in life that are not obviously weather related. People have storms of health crises, of death in the families, of financial crises, etc., that are all severe events. They're all storms in people's lives, and I'm sure you have faced a number of those, or I suspect you've faced a number of those in your lives as well. So in today's lesson, we're going to see Noah and his family face the greatest physical storm ever, the flood. I don't think anybody can top the flood. And the flood was obviously a severe weather event, the most severe weather event in history. However, I think also during the flood that Noah and his family also faced other mental and emotional storms that accompanied the flood. So let's first look at a timeline, kind of a little bit of review. Look at the timeline as we lead up to the flood. And if you could throw that next visual up. There we go. So hopefully maybe you can see that. So 120 years before the flood, the countdown as such begins. And we won't go through all the Bible references, but they're up there. Then 100 years before the flood, Noah has his first son, Japheth. And at that point, Noah was 500 years old. A couple of years later, Noah has his second son, Shem. And we know that because we're told that 2 years after the flood, that Shem was 102 years after the flood. And then we get some question marks we're not sure about. We're not sure about when exactly Ham, Noah's youngest son, was born. The author of this timeline is authors Ken Ham and Bodie Hodge. So they have some speculation here that they're saying about when that might have happened. So they're thinking that this 2-year interval between sons continued on, and that Ham was born in perhaps 95 or 96 years before the flood. And then they're, again, just speculating, 20 to 40 years. They're thinking then that's the time when these sons got married and helped begin construction on the ark, possibly. And then 55 to 75 years, again, it says estimate. We don't know for sure. Noah was told to build the ark for he and his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives. So again, we don't know exactly that's the case. He could have been told 120 years. I kind of think it was 120 years before. I think that's a little bit misleading. And then we're not sure the exact time the ark was, we're not sure the exact time Noah was told to gather food and put it on aboard the ark. But we are told that 7 days, Noah was given a 7 days warning. These two authors think that it was given in order for Noah to have the final loading of the ark. We gave a couple other reasons that the 7-day warning could have been given before, but these authors think it was for the loading of the ark. And then in year 0, when Noah was 600, the flood waters began. So just a little bit of overview there of what transpired leading up in Noah's family, what's leading up to the flood. So with that, Martha, if you would read Genesis chapter 7, verses 6 through 24. She's going to read that whole long passage to begin with. I don't think you're on. Oh.
No, now I am.
Oh.
Now Noah was 600 years old when the flood of water came upon the earth. Then Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him entered the ark because of the water of the flood. Of clean animals and animals that are not clean, and birds and everything that creeps on the ground, there went into the ark to Noah by twos, male and female, as God had commanded Noah. It came about after 7 days that the water of the flood came upon the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on the same day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened. The rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day, Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them, entered the ark. They and every beast after its kind, and all the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth after its kind, and every bird after its kind, all sorts of birds. So they went into the ark to Noah by twos of all flesh, in which was the breath of life. Those that entered, male and female of flesh, entered as God had commanded him, and the Lord closed it behind him. Then the flood came upon the earth for 40 days, and the water increased and lifted up the ark so that it rose above the earth. The water prevailed and increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. The water prevailed more and more upon the earth, so that all the high mountains everywhere under the heavens were covered. The water prevailed 15 cubits higher, and the mountains were covered. All flesh that moved on the earth perished, birds and cattle and beasts, and every swarming thing that swarms upon the earth, and all mankind. Of all that was on dry land, all in whose nostrils was breath of the Spirit of life died. Thus he blotted out every living thing that was upon the face of the land, from man to animals, to creeping things, and to birds of the sky, and they were blotted out from the earth, and only Noah was left, together with those that were with him in the ark. The water prevailed upon the earth 150 days.
All right, thank you, Mark. So some people believe that the flood of Noah's day was a localized flood, not a flood that covered the entire earth. Even some Christians speculate or postulate that the flood was a local flood, not a flood that covered the whole earth. So what do you think? Do you think Noah's flood was a flood that covered the entire earth? And if not, why not? If so, why so? Yeah, verse 19 says it covers the whole earth, and there are other biblical references that support that. Job 12:15 says that the waters overturned or inundated the earth. Peter says in 2 Peter 3:6, the earth was flooded. Again, entire earth was flooded. What other kind of reasons can you think of that it might be that it covered the entire earth?
Well, if it was given a warning of 120 years, couldn't they have traveled to another area?
Yeah. 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 Nancy says that if it's a 120-year warning, if the people may not have believed the warning, but even once it started raining, they could see, maybe Noah's right, this may be a flood coming. And they could have walked to higher ground, to safety. The people could have. Noah and his family could have. They didn't have to build the ark. They could have walked to higher ground and safety. The animals could have traveled out of danger of a localized flood. Certainly the birds could have flown to an area that would be safe out of a localized flood. So, anything else? Yeah, there's some geological evidence now that sea creatures being fossilized in mountain areas. So, again, there's some geological reasons to support that this was a worldwide flood. Anything else?
In verse 4 of that chapter, it says, "For yet 7 days, and I will cause it to rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living substance that I have made will I destroy from the face of the earth."
Yeah. So if you believe the Bible, then it says every creature would be destroyed. So again, if it's localized, not necessarily every creature would be destroyed. Some could have gotten to safety. Jeff, are you going to say something? No. Also, the flood, it took a little over a year for the water to recede. So if it was a localized flood, it would not have taken over a year for the water to recede. Plus, it says, we will see later where the ark lands. It lands on a mountain, Mount Ararat, which is today's Mount Ararat. We're not sure if it's the same one or not, but if it is, it's 17,000 feet high, and it says the flood was 20 feet higher than the highest mountain. So again, it makes you think this is not a localized flood if the water is 20 feet higher than the highest mountain at that time. So again, it is, some Christians and certainly others speculate or postulate, rather, probably is a better word, that this was a localized flood and it's not a flood that covered the entire earth, but it really does not make sense to think about it being a localized flood. So, Martha, read again for us Genesis chapter 7, 6 through 12, if you would, and let's look specifically at those verses.
Now Noah was 600 years old when the flood of water came upon the earth. Then Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him entered the ark because of the water of the flood. Of clean animals and animals that are not clean, and birds and everything that creeps on the ground, there went into the ark to Noah by twos, male and female, as God had commanded Noah. It came about after 7 days that the water of the flood came upon the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on the same day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened, and the rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights.
All right, so in these verses, God clarifies and emphasizes some specific things. So what do you see in these verses that God clarifies or emphasizes? In verses 6 through 12. He gave a specific date for the most, again, as we said, the most severe weather event in history. So also he gives the specific age of Noah. So this was possibly to mark a new era in history. A lot of times important events in history that you learn the specific dates for those. So that is mentioned there. Yeah. What else? List Noah and his family, the specific people who were on the ark, so they're listed in these verses. Okay.
Summarizes again the animals.
Yeah, and it's one specific thing that is mentioned in these verses we've not heard before about the animals. What is it? They're male and female. So here, God clarifies that the pairs of animals are male and female, which certainly has significance that he intended the animals to reproduce after they get off the ark, but it may have other significance as well, that they were male and female. What else? Anything else? Now, Lorraine's going to last 40 days and 40 nights. That's in there as well, so that's specific. Genesis, in the 10th verse there of chapter 7, it says, now it came about after the 7 days that the waters of the flood came upon the earth. So God had told Noah it's going to be 7 days. It was 7 days, and I think the point to us is that God is never late and God is never early. God is always right on time. So the 7 days is exactly what God had told Noah. Warren Wiersbe quotes Psalm 32, verse 9. It says, do not be like the horse or the mule. Wiersbe says the horse sometimes wants to rush ahead impetuously, and the mule wants to drag his feet and stubbornly stay back. But Noah walked with God, worked for God, and let God arrange the schedule. So how often are we like the horse, or how often are we like the mule, that we want to either rush ahead or stubbornly stay behind? So here Noah and his family are about to enter the flood of floods, the storm of all storms. Their lives are going to be turned upside down. So you may also be in the midst of a storm in your life or about to enter a storm in your life. So you can take solace, I think, from the words of David in Psalm chapter 29, verses 10 and 11, when David says, "The Lord sat as king at the flood. Yes, the Lord sits as king forever. The Lord will give strength to his people. The Lord will bless his people with peace." So regardless of the storm that you are in or about to face possibly, keep these words in mind, that the Lord is on his throne. The Lord was in control of the flood of Noah's day, and he is in control of the storms that you and I may face today as well.
And also, I think another thing in those verses, we think about the rain falling, but then it talks about the floodgates about to be bursting open. So
Yeah.
Volcanoes or big earthquakes.
Yeah, you've got a mic, so you can talk on the mic.
Okay. The floodgates of the great deep burst open, so it wasn't only the rain, but there was water coming up from the ground, it sounds like, too, with maybe earthquakes and, I don't know, volcanoes, things that would shake the earth.
Yeah, we'll get back to that in just a minute. That's a good point. So it appears that the rain did not only come down, it also came up from below. So we'll get back to that in just a second. Romans chapter 8, verse 28 says, "And we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose." So I think many times it's hard to understand, I guess, this verse when we are going through a storm. It's hard to see how God is working all things for our good when we're in the midst of the storm. Sometimes it takes this time for the storm to pass and for us to look back on it to really understand how God was using that storm in our lives to our good. And sometimes we never know. Sometimes we won't know until eternity what God was doing in our lives at that time. We may not recognize what he was doing specifically. But there's a promise in this verse to look for God in the storms of our lives. Look for what he's doing. We're in the midst of that storm. Look for how he's working in our lives in the midst of that storm. Somehow he's working. Again, we may not totally recognize it, but if we don't look, we for sure are not going to recognize it. So look and seek to see what God is doing during a storm. Genesis 7:7 says, "Then Noah and his sons, his wife, his sons' wives with him," again Mark mentions this, "entered the ark because of the waters of the flood." Anne Graham Lotz, in her book, she provides somewhat of a comical little blurb, you might say, scenario about Mrs. Noah, which I'll read to you. She says, Anne Graham Lotz says, "What if Mrs. Noah had stood, hands on her hips, wagging her finger in Noah's face and protested, 'Noah, I've had about all I can take. First, you leave the good job you had and take up carpentry as a full-time hobby. Then you spend the family savings that was to go for the boy's future on more and more supplies for your endless woodworking. You've been so consumed with your work, we haven't had a family vacation in 120 years. In fact, I can't remember when we really sat down to a nice family dinner. And now you're telling me that I have to go into that big boat with thousands of smelly, noisy, dirty animals, some of which creep and crawl? I don't think so. It's either that boat or me. Take it or leave it." So, well, obviously, Mrs. Noah did not have that kind of unsubmissive attitude. And she recognized her husband, Noah, was acting in submission to God. And as a result of Noah's submission to God and his wife's submission to Mrs. Noah's submission to Noah, their family was saved. So the point, I guess, is are you and your family in submission to God? Are you like Noah in providing a positive, faithful, obedient example in your family? That's a rhetorical question, obviously, but one to consider. So what happens look at Genesis chapter 7, verse 11. What happens, I think Martha just said this, what happens in Genesis 7:11? What's that? Yeah, the rains begin as such. So, and Martha said that in that verse it appears that the rains were coming down, but also water was coming up from the earth as such as well. So in Genesis 7:11, it seems that the work of creation was being reversed. The waters were being merged again. So it says, the foundations of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were open. Martha, read Genesis 1, 6, and 7, please.
6 and 7.
Genesis chapter 1. I didn't give you that one. I'm sorry. I'll read it. Sorry.
I've got it. Then God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. God made the expanse and separated the waters which were below the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening, and there was morning a second day.
Okay. So it appears in verses 6 and 7 that there was a separation of the waters, and now we see in Genesis chapter 7, verse 11, the waters coming back together. A reverse of creation, basically. So, true or false, it had not rained on the earth before Noah's flood. What do you think? True or false, it had not rained on the earth before Noah's flood? The pastor mentioned this, or touched on it, and we've touched on it in passing. Bible doesn't mention rain before this point, so some people take that to mean that, possibly it never had rain to this point, so it was something new. Some biblical theologians believe that there was not rain, as Jamie says, until this flood, because the Bible doesn't mention it. And they've termed this the canopy effect. And this belief, this canopy effect belief, purports that the earth was engaged in a kind of a giant greenhouse type atmosphere. And the canopy, it is speculated, consisted of either water, ice, or vapor. So this modern kind of thought of a canopy effect on the earth was really kind of, what's the right word? This thought grew from a book published in 1961 by Dr. Henry Morris and Dr. John Whitcomb, who really put this theory out there, this canopy effect. And the canopy effect was credited from preventing harmful radiation, which might have led to the people living longer during this time because they weren't exposed to the radiation. And it also was increased the atmosphere, surface atmospheric pressure of oxygen, so greater oxygen. The people had greater access to oxygen. So, and it would have kept the world at a constant temperature, producing kind of a uniform climate. And this thought then, and the pastor kind of mentioned this, that the thought was a lot of this water may, from the flood, have come from the collapse of the canopy over these 40 days. So, now, there is some problems with this interpretation of the canopy effect, and included in those, if you look at Genesis chapter 1, verses 14 and 15, it brings up an issue about the canopy effect. So Martha, if you would read Genesis 1, 14 and 15.
Then God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth. And it was so.
All right, so if there was a canopy that consisted of water or ice or vapor, it would have at least distorted, if not made it impossible, to use the stars as signs as such, or to view the stars, to use them as signs for the seasons and for directional purposes and so forth. So again, that kind of puts a little bit of a damper on this thought of the canopy effect. But regardless, the canopy effect is, as we talked about before, it's a rib issue. It's not a spine issue. Different biblical theologians can believe in it or not believe in it. It's not a salvation issue. I guess you might say it's just an interesting issue. We'll have to wait till we're in heaven to find out if there was or was not a canopy. So we're told the rain fell for 40 days and 40 nights. 40 is a significant number in the Bible. And there's some derivative of the number 40 that occurs, depending on your translation of the Bible, 104 to 146 times in the Bible. So it's an important number in the Bible. So let me back up. What are some other significant events in the Bible, or significant uses of the number 40 in the Bible? I'm sorry? Christ was in the desert, the wilderness for 40 days being tempted. That's certainly an important one. What else? The Israelites wandered in the wilderness for 40 years after they left Egypt. Yeah, another one. Big event, obviously.
Was David's reign in Israel 40 years?
Yeah, David's reign, Solomon's reign, Saul's reign was all 40 years. Each of their reigns as king were 40 years. And there's some other kings that reigned for 40 years, Judah or Israel kings as well. So 40 was kind of a significant number in terms of time, length of time that kings reigned. What else?
Was it 40 days between resurrection and the ascension?
40 days between the resurrection and ascension. Christ was back on earth 40 days after he arose from the grave. Definitely an important use of 40. What else? Anybody else? All these are good. Martha, do you have one? You going to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, wasn't it 400? It was 400 years, so it's multiplied,
Yeah.
by 10.
A derivative of 40.
They didn't hear from God.
Yeah.
New Testament, New Testament.
Yeah. 400 years between the last prophet and John the Baptist that God did not speak. So an important derivative of 40. Yeah, Moses was on the mountain getting the commandments for 40 days and 40 nights, not only once, but twice. He had to go back, didn't he? So both times he was up there for 40 days and 40 nights. Good one. I'm impressed. Y'all are getting a lot of these. Any others? There's some more obscure ones here. Isaac and Esau were both married at the age of 40. So that's kind of obscure, but yeah. Let's see. It took 40 days in Egypt to embalm a person, so it took 40 days for Joseph's father, Jacob, to be embalmed. So another use of 40 we see in there. The Israelite spies were in the Promised Land 40 days to spying on the Promised Land. So that's another one. Abdon, a judge of Israel, had 40 sons. Now, that's poor Abdon's wife, right? But, yeah, 40 sons. So that's kind of an obscure one, but what's that?
Not for her.
It's not obscure for her, right? So, Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots and 12,000 horsemen. But 40,000 stalls of horsemen, can you imagine? I mean, the richest person ever, and that just gives you kind of a hint of it. That's beyond comprehension. God gave Nineveh 40 days to repent at Jonah's preaching. Let's see if there's any others here. Okay, so what's the importance of the number 40? Why are there so many uses of this number 40? Everything has significance in the Bible, so there's got to be some significance to this number 40. What is it? Any ideas? Well, if we go back to the numbers, each number has kind of a meaning to it. The number 4 is representative of the world, like 4 directions. We'll see when we get back to the study of Mark, there's 4 souls kind of representing people as such, different types of people or decision choices of people, I guess you would say. 40 typically represents a time of testing, a time to be humbled. One of those two things. So if you start thinking about a lot of these 40s we just mentioned, a lot of them are around times of testing or really times to be or should be humbled. So it's also, I think, this is speculated, I guess you'd say, that it took 40 people to write the Bible. There are 40 different, obviously God is the author, but the Holy Spirit inspired 40 different people to write the Bible. So there's some significance there, but anytime you see 40, you probably want to look to see, is this a time of testing or is this a time to be humbled as such? So just kind of thought that was kind of interesting. So here we have 40 days and 40 nights that the rain fell for the flood. So when did the flood begin? When it started raining. Thank you. Alice said the flood began when it started raining. Yeah, that's good. God tells us exactly when the flood began. When was it? 600 year of Noah, but he's even more specific. In the second month, and the 17th day. In the second month, the 17th day, when Noah was 600, the flood began. So it began 7 days after God said it would, just as God said. So from that, I think we can take God's word is always trustworthy. If he says it's going to be 7 days, it's going to be 7 days. And that's 7 is the complete number, the perfect number. So again, we've looked at that before too. So 7 being the perfect number, again, that number has significance here as well. So why would God be so specific about the date the rains of the flood began on the 17th day of the second month of Noah's 600th year? Why would he be so specific about that? So it wouldn't, Martha says it wouldn't. Use your microphone.
So it wouldn't be a myth.
It wouldn't be a myth. And what do you mean by that it wouldn't be a myth?
Because it's proved by date.
It's proved by date. God is very specific here. So it was to show that this was an actual day, an actual time. Okay? What other reason? So they could remember it. You know, we have dates that we remember specifically. Obviously, you're supposed to remember your wife's birthday, so get that one right. But Cindy's birthday was yesterday. Were you going to sing happy birthday this morning, Stan, to Cindy? Already sang it, huh? So I would, Cindy, but you wouldn't like it. So you better stick with Stan. He's a much better singer. But there are other dates. July the 4th, we remember because of what happened, 1776. 9/11, right? A date that most people remember, I think. December 7th, 1941, a day that will live in infamy, right? So there are dates that we remember, and God, I think, Martha, somebody said, that this is a date that should be remembered. That God wanted Noah and his family to remember this specific date, as we have dates in our lives to remember. Some of you may remember the date of your second birth. Some of us don't. I don't remember the exact day. I can remember the day, but I don't remember the date. So hopefully, I may have written it down somewhere, but where I don't know. But hopefully you remember, some of you may remember the exact date that year of your second birth as such. So anyway, there's specific interesting dates, and we'll go on, and when we get to Genesis chapter 8, we'll see that not only this date was specific, but God goes on to give specific dates for landing of the ark, for the receding of the waters, for the drying of the earth, and for the exodus from the ark as well. So God intended for us to know exactly how long each of these phases of the flood as such lasted, from the beginning of the flood to the end of the flood. So this, again, I think, as Martha said earlier, this is to substantiate, to authenticate that this was an actual event in history. This is not a fictional event, because there are specific dates given for it. Okay, Martha, if you would read Genesis chapter 7, 13 through 16, refresh our minds on those verses.
On the very same day, Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and Noah's wife and 3 wives of his sons with them entered the ark. And they and every beast after its kind, and all the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth after its kind, and every bird after its kind, all sorts of birds. So they went into the ark to Noah, and they went into the ark to Noah by twos of all flesh, which was the breath of life. Those that entered, male and female of all flesh, entered as God had commanded him, and the Lord closed it behind him.
Okay. So in verses 14, 15 that Martha just read, it just repeats again that Noah and his family, along with all the male and female animals, entered the ark. And then in verse 16, that verse relates 2 important things. What are the 2 important things that verse relates to us? Somebody said something. God commanded it. Commanded what? To get in. God commanded for them to enter the ark. So that's a third important thing. I got 2 others. But yes, that's good, Debbie. No, that's good. God commanded them to enter the ark. Yep. We're going to talk about that even more in a minute, Debbie. That is an important part. What else? Both male and female entered. Yeah, we talked about that a little bit earlier. God closed the door. We're going to really get onto that in a minute. And that's similar to what Debbie was saying. But there's 2 others.
God brought the animals to Noah. He didn't have to go collect them.
God brought the animals to Noah. Yeah, he didn't have to pick them up. All right, I'm going to give this to you. Huh? They were brought in as to their kind. We talked a lot about the importance of the word kind. But here, this is the 3rd time that we're told that God commanded that Noah did. I'll get out here. God did as Noah commanded. The 3rd time we learn of Noah's obedience and faithfulness in these verses. So what a commendation of Noah that this is. 3 times God says Noah did as he commanded. So wouldn't we like to say we did as as God commanded us routinely 3 times? And then secondly in there, what I noted anyway, that as somebody said, that we are told, somebody just said this, that God shut the door. Who said that? That was the second one. Yeah, Jeanette back there in the back. God shut the door. So we're going to get to that in a minute right now. So what's the implication of God shutting the door? Why didn't Noah just pull the door shut from the inside, like in the airline cabin, the stewardess pulls the door shut? It was God's decision to shut the door. What's important about that, about it being God's decision to shut the door? Exactly right. God cut it off. God shut the door. Why would that be important to Noah?
Noah's work would be finished, and God would, I think, seal that door as well.
God shut the door, God sealed the door. What do you think Noah would have thought possibly if he shut the door? Did I close it too soon? What'd you say, Alan? Oh, will it leak? Yeah, will it leak? But did I close it too soon? By God shutting the door, Noah knows that it's God's decision. He did not leave anybody out that might have come to try to get on the ark. So God shuts the door. It reminds me.
In the scripture, I can't find it, but does God not say, come on in, or come in?
Yeah.
God was already there. God didn't say, you go in and I'm gonna close the door behind you. God was already in there.
Yeah.
So, God was like within our lives, God is always there. God is with us.
Yeah, God issued, Mary's saying, God issued the invitation for Noah and his family to enter. And again, Noah was commended 3 times because he did as God commanded. Everything that God commanded him to do, he was faithful and obedient to do it. And one of those was obviously accepting the invitation to enter the ark, he and his family. It reminds me a little bit of God shutting the door. It reminds me of a father tucking his child in bed. Just that loving touch is such that God shuts the door for Noah and his family as a father's loving touch of tucking his child into bed. Jonah 2:9 says, salvation is from the Lord. So Noah and his family have now entered the salvation of God. The door is shut on others entering. You remember we talked about that. Doors are you can enter through them, but it also is a barrier to keep others out. At this point, it's a barrier as well to keep others out. So judgment was beginning. The 120 years of warning has now ended. So what do you think Noah was thinking about when God shut the door? Alice said he was glad that God shut it because it wouldn't leak. Yeah. What else do you think Noah was thinking about? His heart was probably heavy. He could have relatives still alive out there. His wife could have had relatives still alive out there. Animals, maybe. His heart would be heavy, Novella says, because the door is now shut. Certainly, I think he could be thinking about that. Dorothy, what were you saying?
That was about the same thing I was going to say.
Okay, good. Great minds run together, right?
I think he could also have been thinking that God was pleased before he had done.
Yeah, he could be just thinking, God is pleased. This ark looks like it's going to float. At least it's keeping the water out right now. So, yeah, he was pleased. He'd been commended 3 times by God, so he's thinking of, I'm sure he was thinking about God is pleased with us. Hopefully we think at times that God is pleased with us. Good comment, Mark. What else?
I think the reassurance of love, to feel like you're just right there in the hands of God.
Yeah, he could be thinking about, I'm in this ark. We've called that boat a type of Christ, a type of salvation, so he could feel the love of that experience. Y'all are all very spiritual.
I think I'm just thinking, my goodness, 40 days, 40 nights. I can't imagine what it's going to be like.
Yeah, and we don't even know Noah knew it's going to be 40 days and 40 nights. We know it now, but Noah might not even known that. Noah could be thinking, how long is this going to last? When am I going to get out of this stinky boat? Right? So, yeah, he could probably speculate it's going to be a long time because he now knew how much food was in there. A good point, Martha.
Noah had been obedient to God, and it doesn't indicate that Noah was doing what he wanted. If I were there and I knew people were outside that needed to get in, I would open the door and let more of them in, because I would be doing things on my effort, not on God's. So that prevented Noah from
You've got a microphone. So,
It took the responsibility off of Noah, and so Noah didn't have a guilty conscience about leaving other people behind, when, that was God's decision. And it was also an affirmation that, and to his family, that God was in control.
yeah.
I'm sure that a lot of people, as we saw in the movie, thought he was crazy.
Yeah.
But it was affirmation. Well, I have done the right thing. I have followed, what God wanted me to do.
Yep. And Jeff was saying, I don't know if y'all heard that or not, Jeff was saying, by God, I'm paraphrasing, I may get this wrong, Jeff, by God shutting the door and Noah not trying to reopen the door and let other people in. Can you imagine? We can kind of imagine, maybe there are people knocking on the side of the ark. They could have heard people knocking on the side of the ark, let me in, and so forth. But Noah was following in God's plan and not in his own plan. If we heard people Jeff said if he'd heard people knocking on the outside door, and probably refers to all of us, if we'd heard people knocking on the outside of the door, we might be tempted to, in our own plan, to open the door and let people in who'd really not had faith, who really weren't obedient. So with that, then, it gets back to this one door concept. And the door for us today is still open for our friends, our neighbors, our family, and so forth. But again, just like Noah, when he entered the ark, we're not told he knew how long he was going to be in there. So we don't know how long the door will remain open as well. God is patient, but one day the door will be shut and judgment again will occur. Hebrews 9:27 says, and just as it is destined for people to die once, and after this comes judgment. Death shuts the door. And then 2 Peter 3:7 says, but by his word the present heavens and earth are being reserved for fire, kept for the day of judgment and destruction of ungodly people. So one day judgment will occur, the door will be shut, because this earth will again come, or this earth will come to an end at that time. It will be transformed. The door will be shut. So the question, and I think again all of us have done this, but have you entered the door? If not, enter the door. God is patient, but he will not be patient forever. So enter the door today if you've not done so. Genesis 17 through 20, there's the words of the old vacation Bible song. Just realize, did y'all sing this? The rains came down. Y'all remember this? The rains came down and the floods came up, right? The rains came down. So there we see where that song obviously originated. So let's look at, in closing today, there's a brief depiction of the ark and the flood. If you could run that video, it's only a few seconds. So. That looked kind of rocky, didn't it? There might be some seasick animals and people in there too, yeah. So I don't think they were necessarily immune to the potential of being seasick in there. So it didn't look like a very fun ride unless you're a fan of roller coasters or something. So anyway, we will stop there. We'll pick up at Genesis 7:20 next week. Thank y'all for being here this morning, and we'll continue on through Noah and the flood and his life and for the next several weeks. So thank you again. Y'all have a blessed week.